This is a reading from Isaiah 40, 28 through 31. Have you not known, have you not heard, the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, neither faints nor is weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the weak, and to those who have no might he increases strength. Even the youth shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. I just made that up.
Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Sabbath. Okay, this morning, my head is in a cloud today. Is this a little hot? Okay, this morning, we're going to read a whole book. 1 John 3. And I think we can find ourselves in this book because it's addressed to a person. 1 John 3, 1 through 14. The elder, to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers. For I rejoiced greatly when the brethren came and testified of the truth that is in you, just as you walk in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. Truth is very emphasized here. Beloved, you do faithfully whatever you do for the brethren and for the strangers who have borne witness of your love before the church. If you send them forward on their journey in a manner worthy of God, you will do well, because they went forth for his name's sake, taking nothing from the Gentiles. We therefore ought to receive such, that we may become fellow workers for the truth. I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to have the preeminence among them, does not receive us. Therefore, if I come, I will call to mind his deeds which he does, prating against us with malicious words. And not content with that, he himself does not receive the brethren, and forbids those who wish to, putting them out of the church. Beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. He who does good is of God, but he who does evil has not seen God. Demetrius has a good testimony from all, and from the truth itself, and we also bear witness, and you know that our testimony is true. I had many things to write, but I do not wish to write to you with pen and ink. But I hope to see you shortly, and will speak face to face. Peace be to you. Our friends greet you. Greet the friends. What was that? Is it working now?
Try one more time.
I'm on right now. Okay. Well, John here, Gaius is who this is addressed to. He's a hospitable character. He's a friend to the workers of the gospel. He's a spiritual man. And notice that Paul's emphasis on the truth in verse 3 and 4 there. But John paints a very vivid picture of the first century church life. It's like we're kind of like a fly on the wall witnessing some of the circumstances that's going on in this early church. now, 3rd John is similar to 2nd John. He uses a lot of key words like love and truth, and we find those, these same words in 3rd John. But there is a difference here in the midst of all these similarities, and it's simply that in 2nd John, it's addressed to the elect lady. The elect lady, in other words, he's writing to the church. Very often, lady or the woman represents, even in prophecy, the woman it represents the church or a church. But he's writing to the church, warning them in 2nd John that not to admit false teachers into their home, and not to admit them into their fellowship. John and Paul both do a lot of warning about these things. So here he's warned the church. He's given a critique whereby they can know and identify the truth from the false. But in 3rd John, it's unique in the way that he's writing to a person. He's writing to Gaius. And Gaius is being commended on the very fact that he's admitted teachers into the church and where he's resided. Instead of prohibiting people coming in, Gaius is commended for allowing people to come into the church. But the type of people is what is of noteworthy. But this, he's telling them that you should never refuse admittance to those who are true teachers and preachers of the church. So there's two sides of the coin. In this assembly is this man, Gaius, and this is who Paul writes to. 2nd John really is it shows the firmness of love. That love doesn't open this door to every thought that's out there, to everything. It is more protective of the church in love towards the sheep and the wolves that come in to devour. We see Paul addressing this same problem in Titus. He uses the phrase, talking about people who are coming in. He says, whose mouths must be stopped. In another place, a few verses later, he says, rebuke them sharply. So this warning of purveyors of trouble, people who always stirring things and bringing in chaos into the church, and we know that it was needful. It was expedient that Paul warned us. It's expedient that John warns us, because we can look back at history and we know that these things did come. Confusion did come in the church. That the main body of Christ really went into the wilderness, and the churches, by and large, throughout the world became corrupted, and we see the results of that today, even today. But that'll change in the not too distant future. In 3rd John, his emphasis is on love and those who are truly in Christ, literally those who are in fellowship of the gospel and ought to be given admittance and hospitality from God's people. That we need to be open to those who are true to the faith and have are willing to share the gospel with others. I think when we look at this, we see that things really haven't changed much. We still have the same problems. We still have the same type of people that come into the assembly. if you think about this, what was going on here, in 3 John, it's a local church that's some distance from John. He isn't able to go to it personally, so he writes a brief letter. He would rather be there personally talking to them, and he says that he will, but he feels a need to send this letter to him. And we know by inference that he has already written a letter and does know this church, but he writes directly to this person, but he points out this person that is a leader and elder, and he's taken probably a primary position. His name is Diotrephes. John wrote to the church, but he rejected his letter entirely. In verse 9 he says, I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to have preeminence among them, does not receive us. So he wouldn't even give the letter to the church. Now after Diotrephes refused this first letter from John, Paul sent emissaries to the church. But again, Diotrephes stepped forward and he refused their admittance. They wouldn't allow them to come in the church. He refused to even acknowledge them as fellow believers and servants. Verse 10 says, therefore, if I come, I will call to mind his deeds which he does, prating against us with malicious words, and not content that he himself does not receive the brethren, and forbids those who wish to, putting them out of the church. That's a bad situation. We have someone in charge that should not be in charge. Someone that is recognized in the church that is causing unrest in the church. We know from verse 9 that Diotrephes rejected anyone coming from Apostle John, anyone that John sent. As we read in verse 10, it infers that he spreads rumors and about the apostle's character. In fact, it says that he forcefully stopped those who were sympathetic to the apostle John and his brethren. They were under the threat of excommunication. He said anyone who sides with John, he doesn't want him in the church. This is a problem that John is addressing. But there's this one man that John writes this letter to. He's a gracious man. He accepted these missionaries, these people that work in the gospel. He brought them into this home, and his name was Gaius. That's who Paul is writing his letter to. And I'm sure that Gaius obviously knew Diotrephes. He knew what type of man he was. He knew, all his threats that he was making, to those who accepted John. But he obviously wasn't intimidated because he did these things anyway. He cared for those people that came. He helped them on their way. He helped them financially. And when the news returned to the Apostle John of what Diotrephes' rebellion was, he also knew of Gaius' faithfulness. So, there is there's information going back, and Paul is addressing the situation. He's addressing somebody that he finds faithful. But eventually he intends to go visit this church to set things in order. Sometimes we spend so much time struggling with the problem people in an assembly that we forget to commend and encourage the faithful, and that's what John is doing here. I say this, even our church, I think we are truly blessed here because we haven't experienced those kinds of problems. We have in the past, if you go years back, but we are blessed. I think we have a very loving church, and a lot of us have been around long enough to know that some of these people that are contagious, they come and they go, and sometimes it takes God's guidance and wisdom to know how to react or not react to these things. But the first thing John does in this epistle is he commends Gaius for his faithfulness, for his hospitable character, and being a friend to the workers of the gospel. He recognizes Gaius as a spiritual man. Gaius is the man who helped God's work, and Demetrius is really the one who hindered God's work. He was self-seeking, self-promoting, a proud person, and that's always a problem. Where there's people, there's problems. That's given. We're all human, but I think it's the wisdom of God and knowing God's word to know how our responses should be to these things, and know that sometimes we just have to do what's right and carry on. The early church, had many problems. A lot. If you read Paul's writings to Corinthians and the different churches, they had problems, and Paul gave them solutions to some of these problems. Some of them, some pretty major problems. But you have to recognize that these churches were plagued with problems, and Paul talks about, we read it today, about this falling away. Paul predicted this falling away, that how many people would leave the faith. I think when we read these, we need to say, am I a Gaius or am I a Diotrephes? Am I helpful to God's work? Am I doing it, through the church, or are we being a positive effect or a negative effect? And I think the other thing is do I tolerate evil? In other words, you just don't say anything. And this too takes spiritual discernment to know when to speak and when not to speak. But I think we should always be jealous, if I can use that word, for the church. In other words, protective. Gaius is a popular name in those times, but we have no record of him anyplace else in the scriptures. We don't even know anything about him except what John told us. But he really teaches a great deal of his character in these verses alone. We know, first of all, that he's well beloved, and that's why Paul addresses him as the well beloved Gaius. This tells us about his whole life. He's commending him as a fellow believer, and his witness of that he's a witness to the love and grace of the life of God in God through Jesus Christ. Love and truth is not the only key words in this epistle. Another word would be witness. Gaius is a good witness. We find it in verse 3, and it's expressed in the word testified. He testifies of the Lord. In verse 6, he talks about that he's his report, and that he bears record. I think we're impressed with the fact that this man Gaius is a man who is a great asset to the church, and I think that we can look at that and understand how that we can be one or the other. But he was a tremendous witness and testimony to the love of the truth. This is really the great themes. Love and truth is really the themes in John's epistles. The emphasis, I believe, is that John places a lot of importance on walking in truth. I don't see the emphasis today on truth. It's more on feeling at ease, getting along, not addressing some things that need to be addressed. Some people think it really doesn't matter as long as you're a nice person. And yes, we are to be nice people. We should be peaceful people, but we cannot tolerate evil. Paul taught this over and over again. But John is showing us that truth and life must always be married together. They're inseparable. Compromise, apathy, those kinds of things are not part of the Christian life. Every Christian's life must be a witness of truth, and it should be expressed in our spiritual walk. In verse 3 and 4, he says, "For I rejoiced greatly when brethren came and testified of the truth that is in you, just as you walk in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth." Truth is not just words that we repeat, but truth must be enshrined in our life. It's in every Christian. It should be a witness to others that this person is, what they say is true. They're not going to beguile you. That was one of the things that Jesus noted about Nathanael when he saw him. "Behold, an Israelite in whose mouth is no guile. They speak the truth." You can trust them on that. And Gaius was a great asset in this way. Had a testimony. We see in verse 8 how he helped it. He says, "We therefore ought to receive such as we may become fellow workers for the truth." So in other words, be an assistance to those who are involved in the gospel makes us fellow workers. To walk beside them, to work with them, to encourage them, to help them. That's the definition of church, of the called out ones. They walk together. They agree with one another. And really, that's what Jesus spoke in all his ministry, when he was on earth. Because that's how our light shines. He said, in the Sermon on the Mount, he said, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify the Father which is in heaven." The whole point of residing here on earth, is so that we can be a witness and a light to others, for a record and for a testimony of what true love really is and what truth is. In Gaius, it's really personified in this man who is walking in truth. I think one of the things first thing you notice when he talks to him, he notes that he's spiritually healthy. In verse 2, he says about Gaius, "Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers." In other words, what John's saying is, I hope you have good health just as you're healthy spiritually. It's better to be healthy spiritually than it is to be healthy physically, but it's nice to have both. And Paul and John is hoping for that. I think the second thing that he notes here is just not that he's just spiritually healthy, but He's openly hospitable. This is a man that exemplifies hospitality in the church. It was a delight and a privilege for him to open his doors to those that are working in the gospel. He provided his home. It says even to strangers, especially, or in some versions it translates and especially to strangers. So he was openly hospitable. In the New Testament, you know, we find this throughout the New Testament. Actually, it's in the Old Testament too, that hospitality is something to be coveted. We just read it today in 1 Timothy 3. It talks about hospitality. In Titus, it talks about how that the elders are to be hospitable. Romans 12, we read about the widow that is hospitable to others, and she's honored by the church. This is something that we need to practice today. In 1 Peter 4 and verse 9, we read about how that we're to offer hospitality without grumbling, to be willing to do it. In fact, the writer of Hebrews exhorts us to be hospitable because some have entertained angels unawares. You know, we don't know who we are have an effect on by our hospitality. So, like I say, the New Testament has a lot to say about hospitality, and I realize that doesn't mean that you need to put them up, provide a bed for them necessarily. For many of us, that's not possible. But being hospitable it's really an attitude of openness. It's a willingness to include others in your space. You know, there's a blessing that when you're openly hospitable, because you're just not ministering to service, but you're doing service to the Lord Himself, and you're providing a testimony to others. In Luke's Gospel, in chapter 24, we have an illustration of this hospitality being exhibited on the road to Emmaus after the crucifixion. These two men were walking, and they were despondent. They were thinking, well, where's the hope? And then Jesus appeared to them, explained to them the scriptures, not knowing who He was. In verse 29 of Luke, it says, but they constrained Him, saying, abide with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is far spent. And He went in to stay with them. Now it came to pass, as He sat at the table with them, that He took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened, and they knew Him, and He vanished from their sight. And they said to one another, did not our ears burn within us while we talked with us on the road, and while He opened the scriptures to us? So this is a good example of one of the benefits of being hospitable. Very often there are blessings that are brought with that. I think that's a wonderful story. They opened their home in hospitality to Jesus Himself. So there's a Danish proverb says, where there is room in the heart, there is room in the house. You know, hospitality isn't just putting a meal down for someone. It isn't just inviting someone back for supper. Or hospitality really is opening your heart to others. It's the art of making people feel accepted. You know, we're told in scriptures that faith. He talks about faith in James 2:14. It says, What does it profit, my brethren, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can faith save him? If a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you, but you do not give them the things which are needed for the body, what does it profit? And really, what he's talking about here is, by being hospitable, it's an expression of your care for someone. You know, the Good Samaritan, we have that parable that Jesus gave us, and it doesn't say that, well, the Good Samaritan, you know, he walked up to him and stuck a tract in his pocket, and it doesn't say that. He said that he took this man and cared for him. Because very often this is the first thing that has to happen, because people, they don't really listen to you until you show care for them. You know, maybe it wasn't the gospel first. Maybe it was just compassion first, love. I'm not saying that we shouldn't share the gospel. I'm just saying that very often ears don't hear until they realize that what they're saying to you is for their good. You know, many people understand that we shouldn't be like the Jews, but we do need to realize that we need to be like that Good Samaritan. He showed his love towards us. If you look at John's first epistle, you know, we see it says, "By this we know love, because he laid down his life for us. We also ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. But whosoever has this world's good and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? My little children, let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth. And by this we know that we are of the truth, and shall assure our hearts before him." So in this epistle, we see this man, Gaius, that John was able to write to, that exemplified this attitude. Philippians 4:16 and 17 says, in closing, "For even in Thessalonica you sent aid once again for my necessities. Not that I seek the gift, but I seek the fruit that abounds to your account." Paul didn't desire, he wasn't there because he got gifts or he got something. He desired something better that's described in the next verse. He wanted to see something that changed, that came in the heart. He says in verse 18, it says, "As a sweet-smelling aroma and an acceptable gift, well pleased to God." That's what pleases God. When we do things willingly, we truly do care and love, and I think that we take on that characteristic because that's the kind of God we serve. He's a God that cares and loves for us, even when we were the worst kind of people. Even when we didn't care, he taught us to care. God bless you.